Hello, Rune Scholar, wherever and whenever you are. I'm the modern Erilar. In our last episode, we learned that Old Roman Cursive probably inspired runic Futharks because it would have been the alphabet with which Germanic-speaking peoples could have had the most contact. Additionally, Tineke Looijenga tells us that all runic finds from Danish bogs and graves, approximately dating from the period 160 to 450, have been found in a context that clearly shows Roman connections. Stephen Pollington believes that the invention of the Futhark was born out of a desire to own a means of writing, and the need for such a system not to be a direct copy of the dominant Roman model. So, who would have built this model and why? Multiple types of people had contact with Rome and the opportunity to spread knowledge over a large geographic area. Erik Moltke suggested that Danish merchants may have written the first runic inscriptions. Unfortunately, scholars don't have enough evidence about the lives and actions of Danish merchants in the Roman Iron Age to show how this could have occurred, and no inscriptions have a definitely mercantile origin, for example, receipts or other accounting tools like we see in early cuneiform. Otto Höfler suggested that bands of elite warriors could have developed the rune system. We know that Germanic military and tribal leaders were receiving Roman education by the end of the 1st century BCE. We know that many of these Germanic troops were stationed at Vindolanda. We have many surviving inscriptions on weapons, both in Latin and in runes. So the runic inscriptions on military equipment may have been an imitation of Latin imprints. On lance heads, the names could be either the owner or the manufacturer, and the placement of an inscription on the inside of a shield boss, which we see here, which would then have been invisible after the boss was attached to the wood of the shield, may bear out that interpretation as a maker's mark. So what would the Germanic military be doing with a system of writing, especially one that is consciously non-Roman? We do know that Germanic tribes had extensive contact with the Roman Empire. Between the 1st and the 4th centuries of the Common Era, we see an interesting distribution of objects of Roman origin relative to the border. Moving away from the Roman border, we also observe a decreasing number of finds of everyday objects like clothes fasteners or pottery. On the other hand, as we move away from the limes up to about 600 kilometers in distance, we see an increase in finds of luxury goods, such as glass and bronze. Many of the names in the oldest inscriptions show connections to continental West Germanic tribal name forms, including names of likely weaponsmiths, Vognio and Nithio. Given the many continental artifacts that contemporary people deposited into Danish bogs and graves, we see a strong connection between Scandinavian social elites and both Germanic and Roman continental elites. The economic situation at play here is complex, but to simplify it a lot, the inverse distribution of luxury goods to the Roman border may indicate that the elite of the German nations, while generally friendly to Rome, clearly never had a very strong alignment with the empire, which made it easy for them to act in their own interests when it was expedient, and adopt aspects of Roman culture on their own terms. The most able Germanic soldiers and politicians served the empire while Rome dominated, and acquired literacy in Latin through political and military service. They would have understood how written language creates accuracy and assurance in communications, especially over great distances. During the Batavian Revolt, between 69 and 70 of the Common Era, and the Marcomannic Wars of 166 to 180 of the Common Era, we see flashpoints that could have been a catalyst for the development of a uniquely Germanic identity distinct from that of Rome. and open warfare with Rome may have inspired those literate Germanic leaders to obtain for themselves the military advantages conferred by a uniquely Germanic written language. So what military advantages would Roman-educated Germanic leaders have understood? Codes and ciphers to ensure communication security were widely used by the Roman military. Passwords, which changed frequently for the same security reasons as today, were written, and every soldier needed to acquire enough literacy to know the current password. A very early signaling system described by Polybius divided the Greek alphabet into a 5x5 grid in alphabetical order, communicated via a 10-torch system arranged in left and right groups of 5. The number of left torches raised would indicate the row of the grid, and the number of right torches would then indicate the position of the letter. So for example, zeta would be row 2, position 1, indicated by 2 torches on the left and 1 on the right. The Castaway fragment describes signaling in the 3rd century CE by 3 flames. The left indicated the first 8 letters, the middle the second 8, and the right the final 8. By flashing the fire the correct number of places, you could indicate the letter you intended to communicate. So to continue our prior example, zeta would be 1 flash of the second fire. By flashing the fire, Murray Dahm has argued that these types of Roman signaling influenced the Futhark's division into sets of 8 letters. This system doesn't explain the order of the letters in the Futhark, however. Dahm points out that neither Roman signaling system made an attempt to have the most commonly used letters of the alphabet correspond to the fewest flashes in the system, as is the case with Morse code. And he implies that the Futhark may have corrected this problem of additional effort in conveying common letters. More explicitly, Dahm suggests that the scrambled order of the Futhark's letters may have originated in one specific cryptographic arrangement of the Roman alphabet. To use a more modern term from the national security space, the Futhark may represent effectively a single day's one-time pad, though we otherwise have no evidence that the Romans used a randomized letter orientation to encode messages. However, we do know that runes encoded messages. One of the simplest ways to conceal a message is to reorder the letters, like we see on this 4th century arrow shaft found in Nydam, Jutland. The text reads lua, presumed to be the word for bless or protect, usually spelled alu. The Rimse stone also bears an inscription that may be written backwards. Substitution ciphers are a more complex way to encrypt messages. In a substitution cipher, letters in a message are replaced with other letters in a known orientation which may appear in any pattern, but the inscription on the Vrøk stone in Östergötland substitutes the rune immediately preceding, so A for S, L for A, and so on. We don't have many substitution ciphers that appear in runes, but the Kjæreby church baptismal font encodes the name Torbjorn as Orklaski, using substitution of the following runes. So Ansus for Torisas, and Raido for Ansus, and so on. To understand the following methods of encryption, it's helpful to know that the 24 runes of the Elder Futhark were divided into 3 sets of 8, conveniently called 8s. Murray Dahm connected Polybius's 2nd century BCE grid signaling system with a system used 1,000 years later in southern Germany to encrypt the runes called Isrune. In Isrune encryption, one uses smaller and larger ease runes to indicate which ate and position the rune occupied, a much more common method than the substitution cipher for encoding runic inscriptions. Beork, for example, appears in the third ate as the second letter, so it is written with 3 large ease runes and 2 smaller ones. This group and number system also appears on the Swedish rotbruna stone, though the order of the eights is 2, 3, 1 instead of 1, 2, 3. The portion inscribed in Isrunar is probably the name of the rune carver, which makes sense given the typical form of the dedication inscription that appears on this stone. Similar group and number codes, like the hook runes, used other letters or sets of dots to indicate the numbers using the same pattern of larger and smaller, or sets of dots to indicate how many eights and what position within the 8. And the Volsta stone's inscription seems to use a combination of these two methods to encode the message. A similar system appears in the twig runes of Maeshau on Orkney. The number of twigs on the left side of the stave is the 8, and the position of the letter appears on the right side of the stave. In Maeshau, the encoded portion of the inscription is again thought to be the name of the rune carver, potentially Erlinger. Similar twig runes appear on the Hackness stone from Yorkshire as well. The Röch runestone also has an example of tjaldrunner, or tent runes, where the staves are joined together in a saltire. The runes are read clockwise from the top left with the order of the eights as 3, 2, 1. So in this photo here, we can read 3, 2, 1, 4, 2, 2, 2, 3, 3, 5, 3, 2 with a thorn on and an ending R stroke next to the last stave. The message is then Ul Niruther, or he begat in his 90s. We also see this method on a 6th century sword from Schretzheim and a brooch from Soest, both in Germany. Runes thus have a long association with encryption, an association that could potentially reflect an origin in Roman communications security. Runes spread within the Germanic world, but were not universally used in Germanic areas, nor were they adopted by any neighboring non-Germanic groups. The earliest securely runic texts appear during the 2nd century CE in a sequence that we call the Elder Futhark. We'll learn more about this Futhark in our next episode. Thank you for reading the runes with me, the modern Erilar.